already in Japan, a number of municipalities have already, local governments have recognized basically LGBT same-sex marriage between LGBTQ, and in fact now the list goes, they keep adding letters, and honestly I can't keep up, but same-sex marriage basically. Different, I think Shibuya, Minato has just started the process to recognize what they call civil partnerships, which are basically civil registrations that, bearing in mind of course that Japan isn't really particularly religious to begin with, and that marriage is primarily a civil, it's paperwork, it's a procedure in Japan. Both marriage and divorce, they're actually pretty easy to do, and it's just filling out some forms at the city council office. It's the same as getting a permit for throwing out a large sofa, pretty much getting married and getting divorced in Japan, except of course you do need to fill out some extra parameters and consent is required, but the restrictions are actually, well, there are some funny restrictions, but very little basically in Japan. So the idea of adding a form to allow same-sex people to do is not actually a huge administrative leap, and there are certainly some parts of Japan, Setagaya, Shibuya, coming up soon, Minato Ward in Tokyo, different municipalities have started all over basically to recognize, why not allow the paperwork. The problem is that under the Japanese constitution and under the Japanese national law, marriage is still specifically defined in terms of male and female, men and women marrying, and there is still the fear that the recognition of rights as being equivalent to marriage rights, which can have a meaning, significance, particularly in cases, for example, like spousal benefits in the case of death, inheritance, when people live together and they intend to live together in a civil union. I mean, it's basically being able to be legally treated as a spouse has all sorts of impacts for for pensions, for retirement, for hey gimigo, or never too late for a boom. Glad that you could bring it. For things like work benefits, for being able to travel, being able to be treated as a spouse. So there's basically in a number of prefectures around the country simultaneously, different LGBTQ couples have brought cases in the local district courts, which possibly in the hope that it gets escalated for constitutionality to the Supreme Court to basically get a judicial interpretation which could overturn and create a new interpretation to basically open the gates to this recognition everywhere. So Dan H, thank you for the super chat there, and valid point. Civil partnerships and marriages are two different things and have different legal weights and acceptance. Absolutely, and this is the point. So local municipalities can offer up. They can't change the definition of marriage all on their own, but what they can do is they can they are empowered to recognize different degrees of civil partnerships, and that's what they have been recognizing. But the point being, even for those people who live in Shibuya and Setagaya who have access to that, as you correctly point out, this is not it's not equivalent. It's not enough for people that are looking for equality, marriage equality, and this is the point that the people are making on NHK, is that they're not doing this to seek special rights for themselves. They're seeking this to sue basically for equal rights. And this was actually something which I think now it's been. In fact, how is it going in Australia? I think it's going in New Zealand. It's already recognised, and I left New Zealand before it was before gay marriage was same-sex marriage was recognised. But I remember even in the debate in New Zealand, when I was at law school, I remember talking about this and how it would go, and there was still fundamentally, when people push back against this, the two arguments that you hear, particularly when you hear in Australia, I guess you hear every argument against it. And that's right, Australia just had a referendum and accepted it, and it seems like it was a common sense thing, but when they had the debate, man, when Australia has anything political, I think that the majority voted for it. I think that's right. I think that they're legislating to accept it, but it's always terrible how you have people who feel empowered, particularly in politics, particularly in Australia, to just say things like that 50-year-old lady. It's like they still have debates in Queensland about daylight saving, with people believing that having daylight saving with an extra hour of sunshine is going to fade the curtains and the houses faster. And it's pretty much the same with this. Whenever you hear the debates against gay marriage, it's the idea that marriage is primarily for procreation and to provide stable families. And so this is outside, same-sex marriage, it doesn't apply, to which the counter-argument is, well, plenty of people nowadays are getting married and not having kids, plus plenty of people are not able to have kids. I mean, the same law, if you use it as being for having kids, then does that disqualify infertile people from being allowed to be married? What's the difference? And then of course you get the extreme ridiculous thing saying, well, where does this end? And it's quite simple. It ends with consenting adults. And why shouldn't it? It's a no-brainer debate to me. Religion doesn't factor into it. It is about equality and civil rights. And best of luck to these people. I know that they're getting a lot of support within the legal community in Tokyo, and probably around Japan as well. They filed these cases simultaneously, and frankly there's not a lot, given that you don't have the religious self-righteous opposition to this. Not to say that there's open acceptance of it, I'm just saying that there's kind of there's a self-righteous bigotry against LGBTQ that a lot of people who, again, like that lady, who feel entitled to embrace their ignorance at times because of the religious justification, which I don't think actually exists. Even in religious circles, of course, different churches recognize now and accept gay clergy and gay marriages, including Church of England, for example. But in Japan, that's not even a factor, right? It's just more about conservative sort of social values and so on. But this is. I think this is. It'll be good to see. We know that in Taiwan that they did this recently, and it actually got pushed back. It moved a little bit too fast for the society there. And I think there was a referendum where they actually voted against it, which was surprising, but it shows that in Asia, it's a step forward and a step back, but I think it's progressing forward. But once again, this is an area where Japan is really leading the way, and congratulations and best of luck to people who are challenging the constitutionality of limiting the definition of marriage to being strictly between men and women. And to me, this is a no-brainer. The only risk about this is that I was watching Tokyo on Fire. It's even good as a podcast. The Langley Esquire podcast, talking about Japanese politics, and I was listening to it last night, talking about the Japanese Supreme Court. There is an interesting thing that the Japanese Supreme Court does exist like the American Supreme Court. And it can rule on constitutional matters. The difference is, however, though, that it's not really as strongly independent or as empowered as Supreme Courts in other countries. And it is very common that on important matters like the status of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, and in other matters which might be politically sensitive, the Supreme Court will often explicitly defer to the Diet and say this is something that needs to be legislated. It's not up to judges to make in place of lawmakers. So although they are taking this with the hope that the court will make a ruling which will effectively alter the interpretation of the Constitution, and why not? I mean, if Japan can have a constitution which says that it shall not hold military forces of land, sea and air, and yet have the Japan Self-Defense Forces, why not let same-sex marriage happen? I mean, it's a much smaller gap, obviously. But that said, it's not totally cut and dry that the Supreme Court of Japan, if it gets that far, will have the backbone to go all the way to recognize this. But we'll see. Dan H. again saying, didn't the Japanese Deputy Prime Minister, former Prime Minister and Finance Minister, currently Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, did he not say it's women's fault for the declining birth rate? That was a gaffe, but yes, he said that. By the way, Dan H., I appreciate the super chats. Of course, you don't have to do it, but of course, if anyone does a super chat, I am using I'm using the YouTube revenue towards my chat TV, so I appreciate that you're helping support that. And yes, indeed, I talked about this last week with that gaffe, and he said that interesting. Taro Aso is a really interesting character. Actually, he is from a very wealthy Catholic background. He's a Christian. And although he said that, he was basically kind of stumping to a local audience of elderly men and saying, why are they saying it's us who's bad? We're not bad. What about if the young women had been giving birth, we wouldn't be in this pickle now. I don't think he's actually as ignorant as that comes out, but he's got a way of saying the exact wrong thing. And what I give him credit for is that he makes good self-deprecating jokes about it later on, and of course he retracted the comment later on. Hey Tai Nakamura, good to see you. But that's exactly the kind of thing which you're kind of up against, where you've obviously got lawmakers like him who are cognizant of their extremely elderly and conservative constituents that just don't want to see any kind of a change. And certainly you don't want to rely on someone like Taro Aso to carry the flag of marriage equality. It's just not going to happen, right? Better to try for the court first. Certainly, it's highly probable that this sort of thing is going to happen more in the background in Japan. What I like is that there isn't so much quite the same degree of bigoted, self-righteous opposition to this sort of thing that there is in other countries. but we will see how it progresses, and I will certainly keep up to date. And it'll be really interesting when the district courts, the lowest level courts, first start to rule on this, and to see if we get a momentum around this, that Japan could really be, as it is with many other things, the first Asian country to really be fully extended on this, to be sort of, and in line perhaps with other OECD countries in Europe and Australia and North America. So we'll see, but that's pretty good news.